12 minutes past 8 on a Tuesday in November. The front entrance of Whitmore Financial on Bay Street, Halifax. Laurel Drummond stepped out of the black car first, and behind her came 4 people from the Atlantic Investment Council and a junior communications officer with a camera bag over his shoulder. She saw the man near the glass doors. Charcoal work jacket, old canvas bag, a rolled set of documents under his arm. Her eyes moved from the rolled documents to the scuffed boots to the door, and she spoke without breaking stride. The service entrance is around the side. She pointed toward the north corner of the building. He's not with us. The man looked at where she pointed. He nodded once, shifted the roll under his arm, and walked in the direction she had indicated. The communications officer lowered his camera half a beat late. 2 hours earlier, across the Mackay Bridge, the kitchen of a house on Windmill Road in Dartmouth smelled like maple oats and burnt coffee. Owen Rafferty stood at the counter in a gray undershirt with his work jacket draped over the back of a chair. He was stirring a pot with one hand and reading a permission slip with the other, holding the paper at arm's length because he hadn't yet found his glasses. His daughter Maisie sat at the kitchen table with her chin on both fists, watching him with the patient seriousness of someone who had long ago accepted that mornings in this house required effort. She was 9 years old, and she watched the world the way her mother used to watch a chessboard, taking everything in before she moved. "Dad," she said, "you're burning it." He wasn't burning it. He moved the spoon faster. "It's fine, you're burning it," she said again, just as helpfully as the first time. He lifted the pot off the burner and poured the oats into her bowl and set cut apple beside it. On the counter, under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, was a school newsletter he hadn't gotten to yet. Beside it, the permission slip that needed to be signed by Friday, and under that, a reminder about the November interview at the Family Mediation Center that he had already rescheduled twice. On the wall above the table hung a photograph in a wooden frame. Owen younger, hair shorter, a woman beside him with the same dark eyes Maisie had inherited, a 7-year-old Maisie between them at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, all 3 of them squinting into the sun. Behind them, the curved glass facade of a building rose into a clean September sky. The day Whitmore Financial Tower opened 2016. Renata had been the one who pressed his name tag straight on his lapel that morning and told him the building was going to outlast both of them. She had been right about that. She had been right about most things. 3 years and 2 months since the accident now. Owen had learned to count in a particular way, the way you count things you can't change, carefully and without looking directly at the number. At 7:40, he drove Maisie to Astral Drive Elementary. The harbor was flat and silver in the November light. Maisie talked the whole way about a field trip. "We're going to a building downtown," she said, the tall one with the whale mural on the side. Owen kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah, you know it, Dad." A small pause. "I've seen it." She accepted this without question, the way she accepted most things he said without question, which was both a gift and something that kept him up at night. He walked her to the door, tightened the strap on her backpack, reminded her to eat her lunch, and not just the cookie. She hugged him hard with both arms the way she had since she was 3, already running before she let go. At 8:10 he unlocked the front door of Rafferty Technical, drafting on Windmill Road. The office was 2 rooms, a large drafting space with a wide format printer along one wall, and a small back office where he did the billing. It smelled of solvent and paper and the particular dryness of recycled air. His one full-time drafter, a young woman named Bex, was already at her station finishing a seal on a delivery tube. "Hey, the Whitmore Financial order is done," they called first thing. Needit walked up to the 14th floor by 10. "Signing event." They said to bypass the receiving room, bring it straight up. Owen went still at the name Whitmore Financial. He had not been inside that building since 2020. "I'll take it." He said it before she could offer. "You've got the municipality drawings to finish." She slid the tube across the drafting table without argument. He put on his work jacket, slung the canvas bag over his shoulder, slid the tube under his arm, and pointed his truck toward the bridge. 22 floors above Bay Street, Laurel Drummond stood at the mirror behind her office door and adjusted her collar for the 3rd time. Charcoal blazer, no scarf, the small pearl earrings she wore when she wanted to look calm. She had set the outfit out the night before. She had been setting outfits out the night before for 4 months, since the board in Toronto had called her name for this position. Her assistant, Priya, knocked once and stepped in. "Ms. Drummond." Mr. Whitmore is on 26. His assistant confirmed he arrived at 7:30 and isn't to be disturbed until 10. Also, the print shop called. They're bringing the architectural drawings up directly. Mr. Holbrook approved it. Laurel turned from the mirror. When was Whitmore's last visit here? 4 months ago, the day you started. She didn't need Priya to finish the sentence. Arthur Whitmore did not travel from Toronto to Halifax to admire the view. Neil Holbrook appeared in the doorway behind Priya, 52, silver at the temples, always with a tablet, always with 3 agenda items. The delegation moved up their arrival to 8:45. The AIC team wants a lobby photograph before going upstairs, and I told the print shop to bring the drawings up to 14 rather than through receiving because we need them set before the delegation gets to the signing room. Laurel paused. Why not through receiving? It's a time thing, we need it set up. She nodded and let it go. She had no reason to ask which print shop. She lifted her coat from the hook by the door and remembered without wanting to a conversation she'd had with Neil in her second week. He had been showing her the building protocols with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had run things quietly for a long time. The lobby is the face of this firm, he had said. The delegation sees the lobby first and last. What they see there is what they carry into the room. I've held that standard for 9 years. She had taken every piece of advice he'd offered since. At 8:48, she rode the executive elevator to the lobby. The delegation cars were already turning off Barrington Street. She walked through the glass doors into the cold November air and lifted her chin to meet them. 26 floors above her, Arthur Whitmore stood at the window of his private office, holding a coffee he had stopped drinking. He watched the delegation step out of their cars. He watched Laurel walk forward to greet them, back straight, no hesitation, exactly as he had expected. And then something across the street caught his eye. An old white work truck at the curb. A man stepping down in a charcoal jacket and scuffed boots, drawing tube under his arm, canvas bag across his shoulder. Arthur Whitmore set the coffee down on the sill very carefully. He did not look away from the street. 8:51. Service entrance is around the side. Owen nodded once and walked the way she had pointed. He did not look back at her. He did not look at the delegation. He walked along the curved glass face of the building he had designed, with the tube under his arm and his free hand in his jacket pocket and nothing on his face that anyone watching could have named. He had specified the north service entrance himself, 16 meters from the main door past the windscreen he'd argued for because the harbor wind came straight off the water there in January. At the service door, a building operations manager named Cecile Tremblay was on desk with a logbook. She was 61, had been with Whitmore Financial since the building opened, and she had been the one who handed Owen a framed architectural rendering at the completion ceremony in C16. She looked up. She saw him, the logbook tilted in her hand. Mr. Rafferty. The radio on her desk crackled. Neil Holbrook's voice. Cecile, move the print delivery through quickly. Don't hold up the front. Cecile's mouth went flat. She set the logbook down. She came over to him. Mr. Rafferty, I didn't know it was your shop. I'm sorry about this. He looked at her steadily. It's fine. Good to see you, Cecile. She logged him in without another word. He took the service elevator up with a maintenance worker and a woman from catering. The cab smelled of cleaning solution and coffee. At the 9th floor, the doors opened briefly, and through the gap he could see the open ceiling of the atrium he had fought for, the one the first structural engineer had said would compromise the load transfer, the one he had redesigned 3 times to prove otherwise. On 14, he handed the tube to a young man in a headset who signed for it without looking at his face. He took the service elevator back down and walked toward the service exit. 3 floors above, Laurel was leading the delegation back through the main lobby for the photographs. Neil Holbrook was at her side. Eleanor Vance from the AIC was a half-step behind, watching everything with the particular attention of someone deciding what she thought of you. The communications officer had the camera up. The executive elevator chimed. The doors opened. Arthur Whitmore walked out, 70 years old, charcoal suit, white hair combed back. He carried nothing. The delegation turned. Neil's tablet dropped to his side. Eleanor Vance inclined her head. Laurel moved forward at once. Mr. Whitmore, it's a pleasure to. He raised one hand, not unkind. A small flat gesture that meant not yet. He walked past her. He walked past the delegation. He walked across the lobby floor toward the north corridor, and Owen Rafferty came out of it at the same moment with his canvas bag on his shoulder. Arthur Whitmore stopped in front of him and put out his hand. Owen. I owe you an apology for letting you walk into your own building through the side door." The lobby went quiet. The ventilation ran. The communications officer raised his camera and the shutter clicked. Owen took the older man's hand. He did not smile. He inclined his head slightly. Arthur Whitmore turned. He walked Owen toward the delegation, his voice low and deliberate, pitched so that everyone in the lobby could hear it without straining. "Ladies and gentlemen, members of the council, Owen Rafferty, lead structural and architectural consultant on this building, recipient of the Nova Scotia Excellence in Architecture Award in 2016, the man whose engineering work is in every floor you're standing on right now." Eleanor Vance was the first to move. She stepped forward and offered her hand. "Mr. Rafferty, it's a genuine pleasure." The two AIC associates followed. The deputy chair came third. The communications officer took 4 photographs in quick succession and lowered the camera with an expression he didn't quite manage to hide. Laurel stood where she was. The blood had gone out of her face. She could feel the marble through the soles of her shoes. At the far end of the lobby, Neil Holbrook had stopped walking. He took a half step back toward the column behind him, and then he turned and walked toward the stairwell at a pace that was almost but not quite running. Arthur Whitmore extended the invitation upstairs. He included Owen with a small nod. Owen shook his head. "Polite. I have to get back. I have a pickup at 3. You'll come back properly." He nodded once. He would see about that. He walked out through the main doors. Laurel did not watch him go. She turned professionally, smiled at Eleanor Vance, gestured the delegation toward the elevators. Eleanor fell in beside her going up. In the elevator, she watched the floor numbers climb without comment. Then she said, "I think you and I should sit down privately before we finalize the endorsement paperwork. Just the two of us." "Yes," Laurel said, "I think that would be good." She got the delegation to the signing room. She made the introductions she had been rehearsing for 2 weeks. Arthur Whitmore sat at the far end of the table and poured his own water and asked the deputy chair about the council's Eastern portfolio priorities and did not look at Laurel once. At 1 o'clock, she returned to her office and closed the door and stood at the window for a long time. Then she sat down and typed the name Owen Rafferty into the company archive. 19 results. Rafferty Technical Drafting Principal. Lead Consultant on the Whitmore Financial Halifax Commission 2013 through 2016. Nova Scotia Excellence in Architecture 2016. A photograph of a man in a dark jacket at a podium, a woman beside him with dark eyes and a red scarf, a small girl in the woman's arms reaching for the microphone. The news record came up third from the bottom. Renata Claire Rafferty, survived by her husband Owen and their daughter Maisie. February 2021. The drafting firm had laid off 2 employees 4 months later and gone from 6 staff to 2. Laurel sat very still. At 2:30, she drove herself across the McKay Bridge to Dartmouth. She found Rafferty Technical Drafting on Windmill Road. The door was open. A young woman in a heavy sweater waved her in, took one look at her coat and said, "He's not here. He went to get his daughter." Laurel stood in the drafting room doorway for a moment. She looked at the wide format printer, the racks of tubes, the architectural drawings pinned across an entire wall. One of them was the original elevation study for Whitmore Financial. She recognized the building's profile immediately. She took a business card from her pocket. She crossed out her title with one clean stroke of her pen and wrote underneath in her own handwriting, "Mr. Rafferty, I owe you an apology that shouldn't come through an email." She left it on the drafting table. That evening at 6:30, Neil Holbrook was on the phone in his car in the Parkade on Salter Street. He had his jacket off and his tie loosened, and the particular careful cheerfulness of a man who believes he has managed a situation. "The photograph is going in the Chronicle Herald tomorrow." He said it to the board member on the other end. She walked into the lobby and told the founder's personal consultant to use the side door, in front of the AIC. "I'm not raising it as a complaint, Ralph. I just want you to have the full picture." Ralph Dunning said something that took a while to say. Neil smiled at the steering wheel. "Right, of course. I just wanted you to have it." At the same hour, Owen was on the kitchen floor with Maisie, both of them cross-legged, a deck of cards spread between them. Maisie was winning by 8 cards and was managing not to look pleased about it, which was its own kind of pleasure. "Dad," she said, drawing her next card, "did you go to the building with the whale on the side today?" He kept his face still. "For a few minutes, yeah. What's it like inside?" He thought about the marble, the atrium, the old man walking past the delegation. "Nice," he said. "I think you'd like the ceiling. Is it the same as your drawings?" He picked up his card. "Pretty close," he said, "pretty close." Saturday morning came cold and clear. Laurel had not planned on leaving the apartment. She had slept badly for 3 nights and lay in bed at 7:30 listening to the wind off the harbor and thinking about the lobby floor and the morning and what it meant that she had become, without noticing it, the thing she had always looked past. At 9 she put on jeans and a winter coat and walked down to Trident Booksellers on Hollis Street for a novel she'd been putting off since the summer. The bell above the door rang. The shop smelled of old paper and something warm from the cafe counter in the back. She was looking for the fiction shelves at the front. She was not intending to go anywhere near the children's section. She heard the laugh first, small and bright, and then a lower one underneath, that particular quiet laugh a parent makes when a child says something that is funny in a way the child doesn't yet know. She stopped at the end of the picture book aisle. Owen was sitting on the floor with his back against the shelving, legs stretched out, a book in his lap. Maisie was beside him, leaning against his arm, reading aloud from a different book, working her way carefully and cheerfully through the word infrastructure. Owen corrected her, gently, the way you correct a word you want the other person to own. Maisie tried it again, got it exactly right. He made a small sound of satisfaction that she found funny for reasons he didn't ask about. Maisie looked up first. She looked at Laurel with no recognition and a great deal of the kind of curiosity that does not bother being polite about itself. She stood up, came over, and held up the book she'd been reading. "Do you like engineering books? This one's about a girl who fixes a broken bridge and everyone said she couldn't, but she did it, and now there's a real bridge somewhere that's named after her." Laurel crouched down to her level. The hem of her coat spread on the floor. "I haven't read that one." "You should." Maisie said it with the confidence of someone who has read enough books to know when they're right. "My dad reads it to me sometimes." She turned to Owen. "Dad, this lady might like the bridge book." Owen had gotten to his feet. He stood at the end of the aisle with one hand in his jacket pocket and the other holding the book he'd been reading, and his face entirely composed. "Good morning. Good morning." They looked at each other over Maisie's head. Maisie was already crouching back down to look at the bottom shelf. Laurel straightened. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I didn't know who you were on Tuesday." "That's not an excuse. I want to be clear that I know that." "No," Owen said. "It's not." Maisie looked up briefly at the change in tone between them. "Do you know my dad? We met this week." Laurel chose the words carefully. "At his office." Maisie considered this. "He doesn't really do offices. He mostly does drawings." Owens mouthed very slightly at one corner. "That's right," he said. "That's mostly right." Laurel bought bridge book. At the counter she found, inside the front cover, a small letter M penciled neatly in the bottom corner. The woman at the register noticed her noticing it and smiled without offering an explanation. She slid the book into a brown paper bag and said, "Come back any time." Outside, Laurel sat down on the bench near the door and held the book on her knees and did not go anywhere for a while. Hollis Street moved past her in its Saturday way. A cyclist in a yellow jacket, 2 women with a stroller, a man walking a very old dog. None of them looked at her. On Monday morning, Arthur Whitmore had Owen brought up to the conference room on the 26th floor and offered him a consulting role on the Bedford Basin mixed-use redevelopment project. Owen heard him out. He shook his head before Arthur had finished the last sentence. "I don't sign off on drawings anymore. You know that. I'm not asking for your signature. I'm asking for your judgment." Owen looked out the window. The harbor was the color of pewter under November cloud. Below, the bridge arced across the water in 2 long curves. "Part-time," he said. "I have a 3 o'clock pickup every day. That's not something I negotiate around." 3 o'clock. In the contract. The project would be jointly administered by Whitmore Properties Atlantic. Laurel Drummond was the operational lead. Owen would work from a small office on the 18th floor 3 mornings a week. He started Wednesday. For a week they worked alongside each other and said very little beyond what the work required. She brought him drawings. He read them the way someone reads a letter they've been waiting for, looking for what wasn't said. He could tell her in 4 words why a space was going to feel wrong at certain hours, even though the plans were technically correct. He drew directly on the drawings in soft pencil, light enough to erase, and handed them back. On Thursday they worked late. At 8:30 she ordered Thai takeout from a place on Spring Garden Road and put 2 containers on the table between the drawings. The floor had gone quiet 2 hours earlier. Only the cleaning crew moved at the far end, and somewhere in the building a door kept swinging on its hinge. She asked quietly, after a long time, about Renata. He set down his chopsticks. He was quiet for a moment. She was sick for 8 months. I was running a project up in Truro, the last 3 of them. I kept telling myself I'd wrap it by December, and then I'd be home properly. December came. I wrapped the project. I wasn't home enough. I'm sorry. It's not new anymore. It's just there. She'd not press. She watched him for a moment without meaning to. The desk lamp caught the lines at the corners of his eyes. After a while, she told him about her father. A maintenance foreman in Moncton. A site manager who had handed him a list of complaints at an office Christmas party and told him to take care of them over the holidays because that's what the maintenance guys are for. My father thanked him, said yes sir, took the list. I was 16 and standing right there. I watched him fold that piece of paper and put it in his chest pocket, and I decided I would never be the person on the side of that. She looked at her hands. On Tuesday morning I was exactly that person. Owen looked at her across the table. Sometimes we learn more from the mistakes we swore we'd never make than from any of the ones we planned for. She didn't answer. She looked down at the container of rice. Down the corridor, Neil Holbrook was walking past the conference room with a folder under his arm. He slowed. He looked through the narrow vertical window beside the door. He took his phone from his inside pocket and held it up toward the glass. The flash did not fire. Cecile Tremblay, coming out of the supply room across the corridor with a stack of filing folders, saw him at the window. She saw him raise the phone. She watched him lower it and continue down the hall at an even pace. She stood in the corridor with the folders held flat against her chest and her jaw set. She had worked in this building for 8 years. Her contract came up for renewal in 4 months. Neil Holbrook was the officer who signed it. She went back into the supply room and put the folders down and took out her own phone and began to write down dates, methodically, starting from the beginning. The board review was called for the following Wednesday at 9 in the morning in the executive conference room on 26. Neil Holbrook had filed a formal conduct complaint with the parent board in Toronto. 2 photographs taken through the conference room window, time-stamped, submitted with a memorandum alleging unprofessional executive conduct and noting that the Halifax CEO had publicly dismissed the founder's personal consultant before the Atlantic Investment Council and was now conducting what the memorandum called an inappropriate working relationship with the same individual. Laurel read the memorandum at 6 in the morning at her kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. She read it twice, set it down, washed the cup, dressed in the gray suit she kept for the days that required it. Owen received a brief email from Arthur at 8 o'clock that morning, asking him to be in the same room at the same time. No reason was given. He drove across the bridge with the radio off and his hands loose on the wheel. They met in the corridor outside the conference room at 8:55. Laurel looked at him for 1 second and looked away. He held the door. Inside, the long table was already lined with board members and 2 people from the Toronto legal team. Ralph Dunning sat at one end with his hands folded. Neil Holbrook sat at the other in a dark suit with the calm of a man who had prepared. The chair read the complaint summary in a flat voice. Public dismissal of a senior consultant before an investment delegation. Conduct unbecoming a chief executive. Alleged personal entanglement compromising operational independence. Laurel asked permission to speak. She accepted full responsibility for her conduct on Tuesday morning without qualification. She rejected the second allegation on the record. The chair turned to Owen. There was a knock at the door. It opened without anyone waiting for permission. Cecile Tremblay walked in her building operations jacket with a manila folder under one arm. She looked at no one in particular except the chair. I apologize for interrupting. She set the folder on the table. There's information the board should have before this goes any further. She opened the folder, laid 3 pages flat on the table. On Tuesday morning at 8:43, Mr. Holbrook directed me by radio to send the print delivery to the North Service entrance, knowing that the delivery was being made by Mr. Rafferty himself, and knowing who Mr. Rafferty is. I have the radio log. On Thursday evening at 8:40, Mr. Holbrook photographed Ms. Drummond and Mr. Rafferty through the conference room window without their knowledge. I was across the corridor. I saw him do it. On Friday morning, Mr. Holbrook sent an email to a freelance journalist at the Chronicle Herald, offering advance access to what he called a developing story at a Bay Street firm. That email is the 3rd page. On Saturday the 9th and again on Monday the 11th, Mr. Holbrook called board member Ralph Dunning's personal number. The call logs are attached. She paused. Her hands were steady on the table. I have kept this to myself because my contract renewal is in 4 months and Mr. Holbrook is the signing officer. I have worked in this building for 8 years. I watched it go up from the outside and I have been inside it every day since it opened. I am not going to watch it be used to remove another good person from it. Neil Holbrook stood up. This is completely out of order. She's operations staff. She has no standing. The door at the back of the room opened. Arthur Whitmore walked in. He did not speak immediately. He walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chair and looked at Neil with the particular patience of someone who has been patient for a long time and is now finished. Sit down, Neil. Neil sat. Arthur looked at the board. I've had Mr. Holbrook's communications under audit for 11 months. What Ms. Tremblay has put on the table is consistent with what my office already holds. Mr. Holbrook is suspended without pay at the moment, pending formal referral for breach of fiduciary conduct. He turned to Laurel. His face did not soften. Miss Drummond, I gave you this position because I believed you understood something about how power works when it forgets where it came from. On Tuesday morning you forgot. I believe the last 2 weeks have reminded you. Laurel held his eyes. Her voice did not waver. I won't lose that again. Good. He looked at Owen. My apologies. Again. Owen nodded once. Accepted, Arthur. Again. The meeting adjourned. Neil Holbrook was accompanied out by building security through the main lobby, past the reception desk, past the glass doors, in full view of the morning staff coming through the entrance. Cecile Tremblay watched from her post near the service corridor with no expression on her face. That evening, Laurel left the building at 7. She walked through the main lobby for the first time since the morning of the delegation visit. She was not in a hurry. She looked at the ceiling of the atrium. She looked at the proportion of the glass panels. She looked at the way the evening light came in off the harbor at that hour and hit the stone floor at a particular angle that made the whole space feel like it was still deciding what it wanted to be. Owen had designed it that way. She understood that now. Cecile was still at the operations desk. Laurel stopped in front of her. She had not planned what to say.
Thank you, Cecile.
Cecile looked up. She did not smile. She inclined her head the way she had inclined it 8 years ago to a young consultant on his first walkthrough of a building not yet open. Then she went back to her log. Owen was outside on the sidewalk with his jacket zipped and his hands in his pockets, looking up Bay Street at nothing particular. He had not planned on still being there. She stopped beside him. Can I drive you back? He looked at her. He nodded. She drove him across the Mackay Bridge with the heat on low and both windows cracked. The harbor lights were coming on below. The bridge cables caught the amber of the sodium lamps and pulsed in long, even intervals as they passed. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Owen said, Maisie asked me something last night. She kept her eyes on the road. What did she ask? She asked if you were the lady from the bookstore who bought the bridge book. Laurel was quiet. What did you tell her? I told her I thought so. But I don't make her promises about other people. That's not fair to her. Laurel nodded slowly. The bridge straightened out and the Dartmouth shore came up ahead of them in the dark. That's the right call, she said. He didn't answer. She took the Windmill Road exit. The streets were dark and still and smelled of low tide and cold pine. She pulled up at the curb in front of his house. The porch light was on. A small lamp was lit in the front window. Before he opened the door, he turned to her. You know why I didn't say anything when you pointed me to the side entrance? She waited. Because I designed that door. I knew exactly where it was and exactly where it led, and I trusted the building to carry what I couldn't say in that moment. Buildings do that if you built them honestly. They hold things. She turned to look at him fully for the first time since she'd picked him up. The dashboard light was low, and if it hadn't worked out that way, he thought about it the way he thought about structural problems, turning it over slowly. Then I'd have gone home to my daughter, he said. I stopped needing buildings to defend me a long time ago. What happened Tuesday? That was something. I don't know whose doing it was, but I'm not going to be ungrateful about it. He stepped out and closed the door gently behind him. The front door opened before he reached the porch. Maisie appeared in the gap in sock feet and pajamas, already talking. He bent and picked her up in one motion and carried her inside, and the door swung closed behind them. The front light stayed on. Upstairs a softer light came on. Maisie's room. Laurel could see just through the curtain the shape of him sitting on the edge of the bed. She sat at the curb for nearly 5 minutes before she put the car in drive. She drove back across the bridge with both windows still cracked and did not turn the radio on. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in mid-December, the Bedford Basin Community Hub opened with a small ceremony. The morning was cold and the water was silver gray and still. The old brick building had been opened up into a flexible community space, the original timber frame left exposed and painted a soft charcoal, the high windows facing the water, bringing in the winter light in long pale panels. Owen had spent 5 weeks working through the circulation and the light, and the way the entry would feel to someone arriving alone on a February evening. He had not signed anything. He had marked drawings in soft pencil and handed them back. Laurel stood at the front entrance at 9:40 in a long coat waiting. Arthur Whitmore was already inside speaking to the Heritage Committee. A small crowd of donors and neighbors was gathering under the timber portico. The old white truck pulled into the parking area at 5 to 10. Maisie got out, first in a navy coat and her good boots and the sketchbook she carried everywhere held against her chest. She ran straight at Laurel and grabbed her hand with both of hers without preamble. Hi, Care. Dad says you and him fixed the whole thing. Your dad fixed most of it. I just kept everything running. Maisie considered this with her head tilted to one side. That's still important, though. Owen came up behind her, dark jacket, gray scarf, hair combed. He had shaved. He looked at the brick face of the building the way you look at something you made a long time ago and are not sure yet how you feel about seeing again. Laurel held out her hand. He looked at it. He was quiet for one beat, then he took it. Maisie took his other hand without being asked. The three of them walked through the front doors together. Inside, Arthur Whitmore spoke briefly. He stood under the central skylight and thanked the donors, and then he named Owen Rafferty by name and said the project would not have been possible without him. He said it simply, the way he said everything, and the room applauded. Laurel spoke last. She had her notes with her and did not look at them. I've learned in the last 2 months, she said, that the way you greet someone when they arrive decides everything about what happens after. This building was made to welcome people in. I'd like to try to do the same. She did not look at Owen. The room applauded. Afterward, there were small plates of food and good coffee along a table by the windows. Maisie took 2 of everything and went to find a chair with a view of the water. Owen walked the length of the space slowly, hands in his pockets, looking up at the timber frame. He stopped at the far window and stood there for a long time. Laurel let him have it. She had started to understand that some of his silences were not absences but small private acts of return to rooms she hadn't been in. Maisie came and stood beside him after a while with her sketchbook open. He bent down and told her something quietly, pointing up at one of the joints where the original beam met the new steel plate. She nodded very seriously. She raised the sketchbook and looked at the joint with the same slight tilt of the head her father used. Then she tugged his sleeve. Dad, can Miss Laurel come for hot chocolate after? Owen looked across the room at Laurel. She nodded, small. Larder coffee on Sackville Street smelled like cinnamon and brown butter and the particular warmth of a small room on a cold morning. The bell above the door rang when they came in. They took the round table near the front window, the one with the wooden top worn smooth at the edges. Maisie opened her sketchbook immediately, set out her 2 best pencils in order, and frowned at the blank page the way her father frowned at a blank plan. Owen ordered coffee for himself and Laurel and hot chocolate for Maisie. The woman who brought it told Maisie she liked her pencils. Maisie thanked her and explained which was for detail and which was for shading very efficiently. They talked about the second phase of the project. Owen would consult on the same terms. 3 mornings a week, 3 o'clock pickup in writing. Laurel would administer from the Whitmore side. The conversation was practical and both of them knew it was also something else. And the practical conversation was a kind of courtesy they were extending to each other until they figured out what the something else was. There was a long quiet. Maisie, Drew. Outside, Sackville Street moved through its Saturday. A man walked past in a red toque. A woman stopped to look in the cafe window and kept walking. A dog sat very patient on the bike rack. What are you drawing, Care? Owen asked. 1 more second. She finished a line, turned the book toward him, then turned it so Laurel could see. 3 figures in front of a low building by water, a man in a jacket, a small girl in a coat, a woman with her hair loose, 2 birds above the building, a bare tree off to one side. The water was made of small, careful horizontal lines. Laurel looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Owen looked at it. He looked at his daughter, who had already flipped to the next page and was drawing what appeared to be a very serious-looking cat with an extremely long tail, fully absorbed and paying them no attention at all. He leaned forward slightly, kept his voice low. "You don't have to go around anymore," he said. "You've already been let in." Laurel put her hand flat on the table between their cups, slowly, the way you set something down that you've been carrying a long way. Owen placed his hand over hers. Lightly, at the edge, the way you ask a question you already know the answer to but still need to ask properly. She didn't move her hand. Maisie drew her cat a small crown and gave it a name in very small letters at the bottom of the page, which she did not share with either of them, because some things a person keeps for themselves. The window held the three of them in the pale December light, and the street outside was cold and bright, and the coffee was warm, and neither of them had been looking for this, which was, in the end, exactly why they'd found it.